Welcome back to Equity Mates. It is time for...
This is Hit My Portfolio. Hit My Portfolio.
That's right. We have a listener on the line and an expert in the studio to review the portfolio of our community member today to help them make some small improvements. On the line, we have Aman. Aman, how are you going?
Good, guys. Good. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. And in the studio for the first time for Pimp My Portfolio is financial advisor Matt Ingram. Matt, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Excited for this.
Yes, no pressure. So, Ren, as always, do you want to take us through Aman's portfolio?
Yeah, so Aman has a number of ETFs, a few key shares, and then some crypto. I would imagine a bit of a core and satellite approach. Just shy of 90% of the portfolio is in ETFs. Some of the bigger holdings, the S&P 500, IVV, Vanguard International shares, and then a number of Australian share holdings, Vanguard Australian shares, Beta shares A200, SBDR, ASX 50, Vanguard Australian shares high yield. Then we've got India, Nifty 50, we've got some gold and Australian property. So there are a number of ETFs to kick things off. 4 shares, MinRes, Viva Energy, Disney, and Alphabet. And then closing it out, some crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and one that I certainly have a question about because I've never heard of it before, Aman, and that is Polkadot. So before we get to how the portfolio came to be, Matt, do you have a nickname for the portfolio?
Yeah, so this one is pretty US-centric, so I've called this one God Bless America.
So Aman, give us a sense of how this portfolio came to be.
So when I was trying to pick different ETFs, and I was introduced to just index funding fairly early in my life. I was very pro US, given the fair share of how it has performed in the last 10 years, not essentially 100 years compared to ASX 200. It was a no-brainer. I wanted to be my core to be sitting with the US markets, and then had a bit of a background in the Indian stocks, which there's mutual funds that are quite popular back in the country. I just wanted to replicate the same idea and the strategy on ASX. That was pretty much it. And then I wanted to dabble around crypto here and there. Just to keep things spicy, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, it was a no-brainer, to be honest.
And before we get to Matt's thoughts, what is Polkadot?
Polkadot is another parachain which is quite popular. I'm talking about 3-4 years ago. It was supposed to take over Ethereum network, but then eventually it just sort of died down, and I'm just not selling it until I die, I feel like. So I think I'm going to just sit on it until my grave. It was promising when I invested, but I don't think so. It's there anymore. So,
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, what are your initial thoughts on Aman's portfolio?
Yeah, so look, as the name implies, obviously the first thing that jumped out was all these US ETFs, which makes sense now with a bit of context, Aman. But looking a bit closer, when you actually read through those ETFs and look what's under the name there, if you exclude cash from your portfolio, it's about 60% in the US. And with IVV, that's US large caps. VGS is 80% US large caps. GGUS is just leveraged US large caps. IHVV is hedged US large caps. And then U100, which is similar to the NASDAQ. It's basically innovative US businesses, ex-financials. It gives perhaps an illusion of diversification, but maybe not so much of the benefits, given a lot of these ETFs have the same names or the same underlying holdings. So nothing necessarily wrong with that. It might be a case of looking at how they performed, what they've done. Is there large capital gains on there? And if you wanted to clean it up, you could clean it up. But if it's going to come with a big tax bill with it, then there's nothing wrong with holding it as it is. But what I would flag is that, as I said before, without cash, it's about 60% of your portfolio is exposed to the US. And, assuming you're based in Australia, this is where your currency is, perhaps your retirement will be here as well. maybe keeping a little bit of a larger allocation to Australian shares would make sense. Right now, it's only about 10% of your portfolio, so maybe bringing some of that home at some point.
What are your thoughts, Matt, on, I guess, even going further than just Australia and I guess more international exposure?
Yeah, so again, looking through the ETFs, outside of the US and Australia, there's about 7.5% of the portfolio is outside of that. Now, the US has done well for a long time, probably will continue to do well for a long time, but just sound portfolio construction would suggest that you should maybe get a little bit more outside of the US and Australia. So the US and Australia. So yeah, with that in mind, there's plenty of ETFs that do that as well. You've got VGS in there, which does have some exposure outside, but as I said, that's about 80% US, so it's not much. I prefer, instead of VGS, having something like IVV and balancing it out with VEU, which is ex-US, and then you just have a bit more control over your allocations. You can dial up VEU if you think Europe or Asia are going to do well, or you can dial up IVV when you're bullish on the US. Gives you a bit more flexibility.
And there are some individual. Well, I guess, what are your thoughts on that, Aman?
Yeah, I mean, I understand there's a bit of an overlap with a lot of ETFs because it's majorly just focus on US, and that was my strategy from the beginning. But I did put in NDIA, which is a fairly larger holding compared to, it's almost touching the allocation percentage of VGS. So I think maybe in the future I would potentially go forward with emerging markets ETF, which could sort of compile everything in one umbrella. But at the moment, I'm just on the fence because if you could see, I've got cash as well sitting there with the 5.4% yield on high savings account. So I'm just going to see and assess how it goes. And but you're right. There's a bit of an overlap, but it was on purpose.
So can I just ask, what's the plan for the cash there? Is that as opportunities arise, you're going to put it in, or are you long cash? Are you holding cash for a while?
Yeah, well, look, I'm probably gonna wait till, because if you look at 22%, I'm probably gonna look at 30%. Every time I reach 30% cash in my portfolio, then that's when I decide to look for places where I can invest and find opportunities. But yeah, I would move away from US for a bit and see if I can. Obviously, if my geared is down, I would get into the geared market and do dollar cost averaging. But at this stage, I'm just going to sit on it for a while. Because it's after a while, if it exceeds and my expenses are quite low compared to what I earn, that cash pile is going to shoot up pretty soon. So it depends how it looks like.
So one other question I wanted to ask Matt was around ETF overlap. So just looking at the US, there's IVV, IHVV, GGUS, and U100. But if we come back to Australia, we've got VAS, which is Australian Shares Top 300, A200, which is Top 200, VHY, which is Australian Shares High Yield, and then SFY, which is ASX 50. How do you think about that? They're all trying to do like slightly different things, but obviously there's a large amount of overlap there. How do you think about that? And if you were to consolidate them, which direction would you be consolidating in?
Yeah, look, I like to keep portfolios clean. So just having a bunch of names in there doing similar things, even if it's a bit different, probably just bugs me from a admin perspective, but that's because it's my job, right? I have to look at portfolios and when they're always messy. But that doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong with doing that. Where I would maybe consider changing a portfolio like this is, even though they're doing slightly different things, it's probably all going to wash out somewhat in the end. Unless you're really going for dividends. You guys have talked plenty of times about high yielding ETFs, and maybe the quality isn't necessarily there. They're just picking the highest dividend paying stocks and throwing them in there. So I wouldn't necessarily focus too much on that, especially if you've got a fairly high cash allocation. That's probably getting a decent return at the moment as well. In terms of whether you go, VAS or A200, it's much the same really. I like A200, but it really is so similar. So I wouldn't worry about changing that too much.
Well, I think, Aman, the takeaway here really is that there's, I guess directionally, it's try and move some away from the US exposure, shore up a little bit here in Australia. Think about something like VAU that is a little bit more international as well, because I think, trimming those lines a little bit, given that there's a fair bit of overlap in there. But it sounds like you're certainly on the right direction anyway.
Yeah. Look, and Aman, to be honest, there's a lot of good things going in here. Some of your direct names, I really like Disney. I think, Netflix has done well, and Netflix does well because, other streaming businesses have caught up. Netflix is making great original content. Who else in the streaming wars has great original content? It's Disney. So, and they have so many ways to monetize it. I mean, Mickey Mouse has been making money for 100 years now. So, really like Disney, really like Alphabet. Mineral Resources, look, that's had a rough run and continues to, but
that's my favorite stock out of all my whole portfolio. That's my favorite stock. Not even GGUS comes close. It's
all right,
goes down, comes up, goes down, comes up.
Yeah.
Wow, this is a ride.
If that's what you
Wakes
enjoy,
me
then
up in the morning every morning without the coffee.
Yeah. Well, long may it continue then.
yeah, between that and crypto, you have plenty to keep you excited.
Yes. Well, we might leave it there, Aman, but thank you so much for submitting the portfolio. I hope there's a few things for you to think about there. And but I think, as Matt said, there's a lot of plenty of good things happening in the portfolio. I guess if there's you just tinker with a few of the things, I guess to tighten it and consolidate it a little bit more. But thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on. And Matt, thank you for talking it through with Aman.
Yeah, thanks, Aman.
All right, thanks, guys.
I will say this about investing. Everything you do learn is cumulative. What I learned at 20 is useful.